ready, and we are live now. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us. So as you know, this panel will focus on UN in action and the sort of general inefficacy of international institutions in intervening to affect, to slow down, to stop the genocide in Gaza, as well as the ongoing annexation of the West Bank by Israel. And so we have a few panelists from representing different organizations. We're very excited to have them here. Just to situate, why this panel now, why we decided to start organizing it, what is happening this week. So this week we have, a few different dates, deadlines, events that are happening sort of all at the same time and then kind of like converging this month. So first of all, on September 18th of 2024, so a year ago, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution that demanded that Israel end its unlawful presence in occupied Palestinian land in the West Bank and Jerusalem within 12 months, and to also immediately comply with the provisional measures in the genocide case at the International Court of Justice. Obviously, a year later, this deadline has now passed a few days ago, and this didn't happen. Israel is just as entrenched in its occupation. It has escalated the genocidal attacks on Gaza, causing the United Nations to declare a famine due to a policy of intentional mass starvation. And just in the last few days, Israeli forces have continued to introduce new restrictions requiring Palestinian residents of freely occupied West Bank communities to obtain permits to enter their own land. So the kind of continued annexation of the West Bank is progressing. The far-right National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is now threatening to propose full annexation of the West Bank at the next cabinet meeting in response to a few countries recognizing the Palestinian state. And at the same time, like all of this is happening, in the context of not just inaction by the United Nations, but sort of active enablement of actors that are deeply complicit, if not, direct architects of the genocide. So on one hand, just a couple of weeks ago, the former German foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, has now assumed the presidency of the United Nations General Assembly. Notoriously, after October 7th, she justified Israeli bombing of civilian targets, and she's now the president of the UN General Assembly. And then in a few days, at the end of this week, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is set to give a speech at the United Nations General Assembly. So we're seeing, on one hand, a failure, an inaction, an inability to stop the genocide, to stop the annexation of Palestinian land, and on another hand, a kind of continued rewarding of some of like the architects and enablers of the genocide. And so the purpose of this discussion when we put together this panel is to kind of understand this, to better understand like where is this failure coming from, where is this inaction coming from, why does the UN, have no kind of meaningful teeth to put meaningful pressure on Israel. Situate this kind of inaction with respect to the genocide in Gaza and the general sort of weakening of international institutions and the attempts by the US, by imperialist powers to capture these international institutions and make them, tools of their own political projects. And then we also want to learn what we can do about it. So we're here to learn about some ongoing campaigns by the Palestinian Youth Movement and by Progressive International to build pressure from below to push the UN to act. And so with this context and with this introduction of why we're here, what what we're kind of hoping to learn. And with this panel, I want to ask each of our speakers to just give a bit of an overview of how you or your organization is thinking about this context that I talked about, and how you're thinking about interacting and putting pressure on the UN. So I will kick us off by passing to Ingar. So Ingar Solti is a senior research fellow in peace and security policy at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation's Institute for Critical Social Analysis in Berlin. And so Ingar, I will pass it off to you to kick us off with your reflections.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope what I'm going to say is useful in some ways. I was asked in particular to speak about like Baerbock and the Green Party's position on this, or like how it is, like why it is not actually a left-wing response to the genocidal war in Gaza. I mean, generally speaking, I think what one has to understand about Germany is that the German raison d'etat is pro-Israel and pro-American. So, like any party that is not pro-European Union, pro-Euro, pro-NATO, pro-US, or pro-Israel is unlikely to join the government. And so parties will conform to that. We see it on the far right now. I mean, the far right, the AfD is trying to join a coalition with the Conservatives. The Conservatives are also preparing this, and on the way, they're going the same path that Meloni has gone in Italy, that Le Pen has gone in France, basically saying yes to NATO, saying yes to the European Union, to the euro as a common currency, and saying yes to Israel and yes to NATO and the United States. I think to understand Baerbock and also how to handle her in the coming years is that she is like of the flesh of the Green Party. And the Green Party, if you ask are the Greens part of the left, even in the broadest sense, I would say no. I mean, the platform today is left liberal on social policy, but it's liberal on like in the economic sense, in economic terms. That means and like it has a little moment of interventionism, but ultimately, like when it comes to a green transition, but ultimately it's oriented towards liberal market economies. Its welfare policy is left liberal, but always depending on whether there's money, and there is no money. So that's basically their position usually. And it's neoconservative in terms of foreign policy. Obviously, we've seen the shift of neoconservatives generally from the right, from the Republican Party in the United States to the Democratic Party in the US, which makes it even easier for them to have a neoconservative mindset. But nonetheless, that neoconservatism has been inbuilt in the party infrastructure. So a little bit of background information on how the development of the Green Party. I mean, when I say that it's not part of the left, I would extend that to saying that the party was not left in a socialist sense from the get-go. I mean, the Maoists that joined it, that were rabidly anti-Soviet, anti-Russian, that's also a continuous, has continuity. They joined the party as individuals, like they had to give up on their affiliation to Maoist groups and became individual members. Obviously, many of them formed the left wing of the party. Then the new ecological question that was that even gave rise to the Greens, because it was not represented in parliament, could be split up along socialist ways, liberal ways, or conservative ways, and all those tendencies were part of the party from the get-go, which reinforced the notion that it was an undogmatic party, which is camouflage, obviously, for intellectual thought laziness and political opportunism. But it also explains why their slogan was not left, not right, but forward. That was like the original slogan. They had an internal left, but that was defeated in 1985 and then left the party. Many of them then joined the Party of Democratic Socialism, like the former party in East Germany as a result. By the time the Greens were capable of joining government, they had already shifted their foreign policy from peace orientation, peace building, cooperation, and détente policies towards human rights interventionism. And that was embodied in the 1999 NATO war of aggression against Yugoslavia. So nobody could have been surprised by the Greens, like the position they took when it came to Ukraine. And nobody should be surprised about the position that they took in the Gaza war, because they, like, their basic orientation, they're the most government party of all. Like, they have no way of, now you can see it, like no means of being an oppositional party. They are an administrative party, so they want to govern. And if the raison d'etat is pro-Israel and pro-America, then that's what they're following. Now Baerbock, you will see it when she talks, like she will follow the this book title, essentially, or the essence of the book title. In the end, everybody will have been against this. Like, she now tries to downplay, or like she now criticizes the far-right government of Israel, but you could and should compare it to what she's been saying in the beginning, because it will unfold in the same way, especially when it comes to the next conflict with China. I mean, they're rabidly not only anti-Russian, but also rabidly anti-Chinese. And that will definitely unfold in the next years. Also, what one should understand is that the Green Party is the most American party in Germany. Some even went as far, like in the German Chancellor and his surroundings. That's what I was told from people who have been informing the Social Democratic Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, is that they were very upset about Baerbock's foreign policy because they considered it a domestic policy. They thought that her undiplomatic way of, confronting everybody and isolating Germany in the world over Gaza, but also over the orientation towards the global South and towards China, that that was partly a means to benefiting the Green Party, because it plays very well amongst a certain segment of the German political, within German political sociology, because it's the most arrogant and in the most arrogant way, a liberal position. Like, we're the good people. We can't, everything that we do is good because we're good. And we can't wrong, we can't err. So I think that's what also explains like this. I mean, and also what must be kept in mind is that for many people on, like, the Greens have no history. Like, at best, their history starts in 1968, because they think, okay, like up until they took power, like, there were the conservatives, the elements of the old, like post-fascist elements. But when they took power, the state was theirs. Like, Germany was cleansed. Now we're on the side of the good guys. And so that was the mentality of many people in the New Left. So the history at best extends until 1968, but for most of them, it only starts when they were formed. And from that, like, what they know about 1933, what they know about German fascism, is that there was a Holocaust. And because most of their cadres come from from academia, like from the very minor, very small, very narrow element of professional middle class people with a university academic background, like, their understanding is that fascism was all about anti-Semitism. that it was not like a moment, like a form of bourgeois rule to essentially wipe out the working class parties and then lead the war of aggression without domestic opposition, like the war against the Soviet Union. But in their mind, it was driven by anti-Semitism, and therefore the Palestinians are now to be sacrificed for their never again position, as if, it was, and the Frankfurt School element plays into it, as if, and like the Holocaust was the result of like a desire to annihilate amongst the population, rather than, the debate about the Holocaust, like, they see it as, and there's a debate about between the intentionalists and the functionalists. So they are on the side of the intentionalists. It was like there was this anti-Semitism that thought this through from the beginning and wanted to exterminate all Jews, rather than the Holocaust emerges from the failure of the Blitzkrieg in the East. It originates from essentially the cold rationality of a bureaucratic state. But given that that is their mindset, they see anti-Semitism everywhere, and they're the strongest supporters of an authoritarian anti-Semitism, which then ties in obviously with anti-Muslim racism, because the notion is that as if anti-Semitism was imported. It's like it's a concept that liberals use and conservatives in Germany. We have a problem with imported anti-Semitism, by which they mean Muslim migrants, which also explains why the Greens were very, like, partly because of their opportunism, but also partly because they actually are racist against Muslims. They were happily embracing the the Fortress Europe, basically keeping migrants from Muslim countries out, and instead trying to mop up professional workers from non-Muslim countries to do the dirty jobs, like in the German healthcare system, and so on and so forth. So I'll leave it at that, but just to give you an idea what yeah, I don't envy you that Baerbock is an American problem now, and obviously she's not, because we're part of the UN too. But part of me is happy that she's no longer in Germany. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that context, and kind of, situating us in like the German political context and giving rise to figures like Baerbock. So this is a great segue to hear from Pavel, who is a researcher and an organizer at the Progressive International, and will tell us a bit more about, what Baerbock's presidency means and sort of situating it in the context of international institutions, and also how Progressive International is mobilizing against her presidency.
Sure. Thanks so much for hosting this, for inviting me. First of all, sorry I'm late. I have to share, I was at this absolutely remarkable sporting event. There's a sport called Alaman Ulak from Kyrgyzstan, which I think you can imagine as something like American football or rugby, except it's every man for himself. You're on horseback, and instead of the ball, you have a decapitated goat. And the goal is to pick up the 30-kilogram decapitated goat off the ground and run in a circle, evading capture or evading having the goat stolen by others. And that was way out of town, so I was stuck in traffic for a while. But I want to pick up on a few things that Ingar said. Yeah, it's just like football, basically, as someone in the comments just said. I want to pick up a few things on what Ingar said, because I think it's really important to recognize that Baerbock's presidency in the United Nations is symptomatic more than just of Western complicity in Palestine. It's symptomatic of a much broader breakdown of international, or subversion really, of international norms and institutions by the West. And it's not just a German question, right? If we look at a lot of political leaders around Europe, you had Baerbock of course, in Germany. You had Kaja Kallas in Estonia, who resigned from her position to become the head of European Union foreign policy, a position from which she has also advanced, rabidly anti-Chinese, anti-Russian, anti-Palestinian positions, going so far as to say that, how to ask how will Europe be able to defeat China if it can't defeat Russia? You know, a position that goes directly against official European Union diplomatic efforts, which, you know, are grounded in the cold reality that Europe is heavily enmeshed with the Chinese market, and heavily dependent on good and stable relations across the Eurasian landmass. So there's been this effort to undermine diplomacy in a much broader sense. We see that in the case of people like the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, and also the former prime minister of Finland, Sanna Marin. See this in people like Petr Pavel from the Czech Republic, who was a NATO general before he became a head of state. And, you know, the list goes on. And what you have in these figures is these kind of cookie cutter imperialists who don't have much by way of competencies, who don't have much by way of character, but who compensate for the lack of skill and lack of character by an iron commitment to the Atlanticist project, to the imperialist project, even where that comes at the expense of their own national interests. So you see these decisions that don't make a lot of sense for a lot of people in the world that are being made in Europe, which are seeing Germany deindustrialized, and they're seeing, you know, huge negative economic repercussions for many European states, a deepening crisis that seemingly has no end, that is being made, you know, I think I would argue, in pursuit of rescuing the transatlantic imperialist project from its contradictions. I think a futile effort, but a real effort and a dangerous effort. And I talk about this because I think the same thing is happening at the international level. So why would someone absolutely devoid of character and absolutely devoid of competencies, who has worked actively to undermine her own government's efforts at improving diplomatic relations, say with China, who actively, you know, opposed her own government's policies at times on a whole range of foreign policy issues, to the point that the former prime minister of Germany carved the Russia desk out of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that he would deal with it directly and not have the Greens handle that, you know, handle that aspect of foreign policy. I think probably on the recognition that they would be a very be a very explosive combination, right? To have them running that particular bit of German policy. And so you have now in Baerbock someone whose political function appears to be to advance the interests exclusively of the Western world. And she has been put in charge of, you know, the UN General Assembly. It's not a position that is particularly influential, although there are some aspects in which she can have, you know, meaningful influence over some of the decisions that are made. But it is symptomatic of attempts by the West, which we've been seeing now for well over a decade, to roll back many of the gains of the international system that emerged after the Second World War, a system that, you know, even though it was founded essentially by Western powers, you know, the United Nations General Assembly in its first meeting had, I think, 55 countries represented. This was a meeting in London, and a meeting that was held while 750 million people around the world still lived under colonial rule. It was about a third of the world population. So these are all institutions that, to a greater or lesser extent, were founded in the crucible of the colonial encounter, and that includes the very structure of international law. But that structure and those institutions underwent pretty profound changes over the course of the 20th century. You had armed struggles for national liberation in the global South. You had socialist revolutions. The combined power of these projects forced through changes in these international institutions that better serve the needs and the interests of the global majority. You had things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which had provisions about, you know, the right to work, the right to leisure, the right to food, the right to water, all pushed through primarily by efforts led by the Soviet Union against huge opposition by the West, but also, of course, through the changing power dynamics in the international system led by anti-colonial struggles. The same was true of the recognition of the right to armed struggle against colonial occupation. The same was true of the UN sanctions against apartheid South Africa. These are all things that were won through extensive struggle. And these are all gains that are being rolled back dramatically by the West in the service of imposing what they call a rules-based international order on the world's people, which is not a real thing. The rules-based international order is a kind of uncodified, unwritten system of basically of imperial impunity, which guarantees a small number of states the right to act in any way they want in the interest of capital accumulation in weaker countries, and also reserves for them the right to punish the rest of the world for not complying with their imperial policies. And so, we've reached a terminal point, I think, in this process where, either these institutions wither away and something new starts to emerge in their place. And we're seeing now efforts to lead these kinds of, build these new infrastructures and spaces like BRICS, although BRICS doesn't pretend to be anything like the United Nations or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or other forms of regional integration or global integration, which are proving to be in some ways more effective media for resolving diplomatic or economic or political conflicts than these institutions, which are fundamentally constrained in their whose room for maneuver is fundamentally constrained by the huge influence that the imperialist centers have within them, not least the U.S. veto on the Security Council, which it has exercised, I think, about 50 times since around the 1970s in defense of the occupation of Palestine. And so one reason why we launched this campaign against Baerbock's presidency is not only to call for her resignation, and we think that that in itself is an important and historic demand. As far as I could find, there has never been a demand for the resignation of a president of the UN General Assembly, not one put forward by popular movements. There's a precedent in the resignation of a UN Secretary General, a different role, also for pro-Western bias and for backing the United States in its brutal war against Korea in the 1950s. Again, after protests from the Soviet Union, he was forced to resign as being unsuitable for the role for his biases. And this is certainly something we hope we could achieve with Baerbock, although that seems very unlikely, especially given how skilled she's been in recent weeks at recalibrating her language and her tone and toning it down and kind of adopting the formal language of the United Nations and walking back some of her positions. Very vile opportunist type behavior, but one that makes her a little bit more difficult to attack now that she's in that role. But also we hope that the campaign can be an opportunity to talk about the things that I just set out. So the attempt to erode the structure of international law, to erode the kind of good bits of the international institutions that were notionally founded after 2 world wars to prevent further wars from erupting, and to highlight efforts by other states to try to rescue these institutions and these norms from their total dismantlement by the imperialist powers. And I'll say one more thing about one such effort that's currently underway in New York. This is one that we've been very closely involved with as well at the Progressive International. And that's an initiative we've called the Hague Group, after the city where the participating states first convened. The Hague Group was a group of 8 global South countries that met in The Hague around the anniversary of South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice, a case against the Israeli regime. And it's the first diplomatic bloc that has committed to coordinating across borders legal and diplomatic and economic measures against the occupation. There was a meeting recently in Colombia, in Bogota, where 31 nations gathered and 12 countries signed a commitment actually to sign up to 6 measures against the occupation, including, very crucially, the commitment to review any public procurement contracts that might involve forces that are in some way implicated in the occupation. So that happened, I think, well, just this summer. And now around the UN General Assembly, there are several meetings that are happening with the Hague Group. Anyone who's in New York is invited to one. I think there's still time to register. This is an event that takes place on Thursday. There's a very good lineup. I can share a link with all of you later. And beyond that, we'd encourage you all in your chapters, in your communities, in your groups to talk about this issue because, for better or worse, you do house the United Nations. The erosion of those institutions is happening from, within the belly of the beast. And I think it's good for people in the US to know that this is happening at your doorstep, right? Not even at your doorstep, within your house. And so I'd encourage you all to kind of read up on the situation. I'd be happy to chat with people here more if helpful, to answer any questions, but also share the petition around. I think the petition is a very useful tool to get people to become aware of the situation and to voice their opposition to this presidency, which I think makes a mockery of international institutions and the United Nations itself. So once again, thank you for inviting me. I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Francesca.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pavel. This is a great segue. You kind of situated, within the context of international institutions and their deterioration, and then kind of bringing us back to the U.S. organizing context. So this is a perfect segue to pass to Nadia to close us off. Nadia is a longtime organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement based in the Bay Area, and PYM just this week is mobilizing against Benjamin Netanyahu's presence at the United Nations. So I will pass to Nadia to tell us a bit about PYM's work around this. And in the meantime, after this, we will have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So in the meantime, if folks have questions for any of our panelists, please share them in the chat. And then I will, pick a couple and see how much we have time for. But yeah, Nadia, take it away.
Thanks, Francesca. Pavel and Ingar, I mean, that was an incredible framing of the United Nations and kind of the realm of international law and legal standards. I think I'm very excited to actually re-listen to this recording because it's very rare to hear such clairvoyant analysis on the United Nations and the creation of the UN, what it was meant to do on a global scale. Particularly in relationship to actual left progressive and people's movements and governments around the world. I think, one thing that I want to name quickly before we get into the role of the rally. So, the ICJ, as you mentioned, Francesca, in July of 2024, actually ruled that Israeli settlements in the Palestinian territories are illegal under international law and needed to be deconstructed. They had 1 year to remove themselves, right, from Gaza and the West Bank and Jerusalem. And I think it's very important, actually, that 1 year timer is now up and nothing has happened. So once again, it kind of highlights the way that international mechanism and law lacks actual material pressures often for people of the global South or who are not part of the central seat of power or the hegemony that already exists. I think what we look for when we look to the United Nations, regardless of this history that Pavel and Ingar highlighted, is actually an external body that is supposed to hold to account the nations of the world to these clear principles of international law, human rights, etc. And I think that we can all be quite cynical about these mechanisms. And still, right, the point is to be able to actually hold them to what they are supposed to be doing, what they say they're doing. I think the second thing I want to highlight is what just happened this past week, which is that the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry actually concluded that Israel has indeed committed genocide. So they're guilty of 4 out of the 5 crimes of genocide. And they both have formed a genocidal intent, including sexual violence, the targeting of children, destroying of healthcare, mass killings of people and systematic destruction of Palestinian society and infrastructure. I think when you look at 4 of the 5 genocidal acts, 1 is killing members of a group, the 2nd is causing bodily injuries or mental harm, the 3rd is inflicting destructive conditions of life, and the 4th is preventing births within the group. So this is very clear. Now, if every nation state that is a member of the United Nations is supposed to both punish Israel and its war crimes and pursue jurisdiction in court against these against the state and the perpetrators of these war crimes, why is Israel still a member of the United Nations? Why is it that this ruling can come this week, and on the 26th, Netanyahu is now coming to announce and to be hosted by the United Nations as a dignitary of the state of Israel? This is the exact contradiction of the moment that we're living in. And I think fundamentally what we've learned is that this change is not going to come from the United Nations. The change actually comes from the pressure within these nation states, right? So we talk about the role of people power. Now is a really important time to interrogate what that means. We're often inspired by the movements of the 1960s and 70s that really challenged global hegemony and were able to shake some of these nation states and also economic systems at its core. Now is another time in order to say, in this era, what is our role? And so I want to also maybe talk a bit about an approach on statehood. I think what we've seen also as another kind of aspect of change is that, for example, Canada, the United Kingdom have now proclaimed that they actually recognize a Palestinian state. So for many of us, they've been asking, what does this mean? How do you all feel about this? And I think, really clearly this shows that in fact there is a change happening, and that change is not coming from the political will of these nations. It's coming again from the pressures of this moment. The fact that genocide is absolutely undeniable, rather than stopping it or actually prosecuting Israel and arresting Netanyahu, kicking out Israel from the United Nations, which are all part of our demands. They're actually saying what we're going to do is try and keep Israel and its power, but try and position a Palestinian partner, right? For us, after nearly 2 years in active complicity by Western governments in the genocide against the Palestinian people, other countries have abdicated on their obligations to end the genocide. That's really, really clear. And so the recent efforts to recognize a Palestinian state is a bargaining chip. And they want to force a ceasefire as a reaction to the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people. But actually what it does is it's a cynical effort to deprive Palestinians of genuine self-determination and sovereignty. The right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and full sovereignty is totally inalienable. And so the genuine fulfillment of this right has to include an independent state with Jerusalem as its capital, with complete sovereignty over all political, economic, security, and foreign affairs. And we absolutely reject any attempt to further undermine our self-determination through the use of entities such as the Palestinian Authority, who we reject as being the representative government of our state. And so if the representation or the recognition of a Palestinian state is only going to be positioned as a conduit for Western control and as a mechanism to disarm the Palestinian people who have the right to self-defense, we absolutely reject that effort. And so I think it's really, really important in this moment to think, okay, if the Western states are trying to observe and confirm that the Palestinian people are part of an international community, and that indeed, we're represented in the United Nations, and therefore we can pursue accountability for crimes against our people. I think this is the one mechanism that we can see and that can be used, because you can see now that the United States and Israel are against this recognition, and that's because in some way it does have a power. So I want to highlight this here. You can hear my very verbose kind of rejectionism of this. And it's important for us to be real about what this means. But also as organizers, we have to see what this opportunity presents in order for us to be able to actually hold Israel accountable for its crimes, and not just place that hope in the common kind of actors like the UK or France or Germany, but to actually look to the states who perhaps have more, show more of a political will, such as Spain or Ireland or Slovenia or Belgium or all the countries of the global south that have joined the Hague Group or actually established the Hague Group, and to say there are other ways that we can actually form locuses of power outside of the United Nations. And so in this moment, also as the Palestinian Youth Movement, we found it very important to join the Hague Group and to actually attend the convening in Colombia, because it shows that there's another place of the global majority that's actually forming parameters that do have material impacts and opportunities to actually press towards a global international standard of law that does represent the majority of the world's people and not just the few. And so what I'll end with is that, as Powell, you said, it's very, very important to be able to organize inside of empire, and the United Nations is coming here to New York. So we're asking for folks to join us in Times Square at 9 a.m. on the 26th, and to march to the United Nations, upholding and uplifting the same demands of the people. We demand the arrest of Netanyahu. We demand the removal of the United Nations, of the Israel from the United Nations, and the sanctioning of Israel. We are demanding that these current findings from the UN Commission actually mean something for the Palestinian people. Right now, over 1 million Palestinians are facing direct bombardment, Gaza City, the threat of mass displacement to nowhere. And the international community, although they can rule this a genocide, has done nothing to actually stop it. And so we're demanding also, as other countries of the world who have shown that they are on the side of the Palestinian people, to utilize their position to actually be bold and to press against the American and Israeli war and genocide against the Palestinian people, because what this genocide opera represents is a shift in global order. If they can do this to the Palestinian people, imagine what is coming for the rest of the people of the world. And I think it's been very, very clear from the countries in Europe that actually fighting against each other to show their best foot forward, who's going to be the best partner for the United States, is only a short-term solution to everybody getting chopped, right? What we see now also with the role of Israel bombing Qatar is that Israel is not just interested, as we talk about kind of the larger expansionist project of Israel, but I think there's something even more nefarious here. What this shows is that Israel is intending to bomb and destroy any country and any force in the region who is formulating any amount of power to go against Israeli and American state interests in the region, whether it's Qatar with US military bases and full economic coordination or not. And so I think we need to be very serious about the fact that this is an existential threat to the entire Middle East and North African region, and countries in the world who have taken an economic and normalization kind of stance for the state of Israel, hoping to get ahead on their corporate and their kind of regional interests, actually see that this is an existential threat for them. Doing good and making good with Israel will no longer, and making good with America will no longer protect them from Israel. What Israel is invested in doing is actually crippling and destroying any semblance of power, any semblance of resistance anywhere in the region in order for them to maintain long-term control. And that's something that we want to say as the Palestinian people. I'll end it here. We know that we are only on the front lines of an anti-imperialist struggle. We are on the front lines of actually pushing against Israel and its dominance and hegemony in the region. And so what we are doing is upholding a fight for everybody else. And what we need these forces in the region, in particular these other forces in the United Nations and the people around the world to remember, is actually that if they're able to bulldoze through our people, if they're able to continue on this escalation against the people of Gaza and the future of the Palestinian people, it's you next who's on the table. It's you next who will be sacrificed. And so I agree with what Pavel and Ingar said. This is an existential moment. And this is also a moment where we have the power to make something different. And there are many initiatives popping up around the world. And it's important for us in the United States to remember that we're part of the international community. We're often separated, removed, but actually our organizing, our movements, the protests, the student intifada that launched in 2023 and 2024 helped to lead the way in many cases for different movements around the world to take up the same. And now Europe, I believe, is going to hold that role, the global South and countries who are, being sacrificed or experiencing a lot of pressure from the United States and the threat of sanctions. We need to be able to support these people, and we need to be able to connect with people around the world in order to be able to take our power, because we actually can make a change. And I would say that I see a lot of fear from the potential that we have as people's movements. And you can see that also in the moment of immense repression here in the United States through the Trump administration against progressive movements across all fronts. So now really is our time to organize and to do so strategically. So I hope that for y'all who are in New York, you're going to come to Times Square at 9 a.m. on the 26th. I hope that if you are outside of New York, you are considering picking up a bus, taking a train or a plane and coming. And if you're not able to join, please do circulate the call. Please do come. It's really, really a critical moment for us as Netanyahu comes to the United States and comes to the UN, for the people to confront him and for us to be able to uplift our demands, and knowing that we are not alone. It is Israel who is being isolated. And it is us, the people of conscience, who are actually coming together in order to shift the status quo and to hold these mechanisms of international law accountable. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for that fantastic intervention, and also for centering the fact that a popular pressure from below is forcing particular states to take some kind of action, is forcing actors that would be more comfortable in continued inaction to do something, even if it's symbolic things like the recognition of a Palestinian state, but this is we should be clear that this is a result of the pressure from the base that these states are feeling. I'm thinking similarly, we're seeing, I'm originally from Italy, and we're seeing in the last few days, even some of the business unions that have been, completely apolitical, completely enmeshed with institutional parties that have not taken any action in the last couple of years. Even some of those more mainstream business unions be forced to respond to the call for a general strike from the general dock workers. And they're forced to do so because we're seeing tens of thousands of people mobilizing for continuously day after day for the last 2 weeks. So this is a great kind of segue to thinking about our role and call to actions that we can end with. Before that, I did want to just take one of the questions from the chat, and I think I will direct it to Pavel. What direct changes do we hope in blocking Baerbock? And after this question, please stay, nobody drop off, stay on for a few more minutes. We will again reshare some calls to actions and talk about what DSA can do to support them. But yes, passing to Pavel on this question first.
Sure, thank you. I think it's a great question, and there are a few things to say here. Some kind of very practical and some slightly more diffuse. Practically speaking, the president of the UN General Assembly has quite significant influence that manifests itself in very subtle ways. For example, they can set the agenda of meetings. They have control over the microphone, which is actually an incredible source of power within the UN General Assembly, because they can deny a voice to certain countries or certain speakers and invite others to speak. They have some role in selecting nominations for the UN Secretary General, who is coming up for renewal. And there are various other ways in which biases, especially in backroom dealings that, out of sight of the diplomatic bodies of most countries, shape the agendas and discussions that take place in a body that's meant to be representative of the world's countries. Now, there are going to be a lot of countries that are going to keep a very close eye on Baerbock, right? Russia is obviously very unhappy that she is president of the UN General Assembly. So is China. So are a bunch of other states, and so is, interestingly, as I've heard on the diplomatic grapevine, the United States, because they see her as being too progressive on things like gender and the environment. So there are lots of people that will be observing her actions for all kinds of reasons. And I think there's, any perception of bias in any direction, I think can be wielded in some way to undermine her role or at least criticize her. And I think it'd be good to use those openings because she can have some impact on what happens behind closed doors. So that's the kind of practical reason of, what does it actually mean for her to be president? But also, I think it's more important than that in building within the movement in the US in opposition to her politics to her presidency is to show that you're conscious as a movement of the ways in which the kind of collective West is working to erode international institutions, and B, that you build that consciousness into your organization organizing efforts over the long run. Now, I know a lot of these things seem very bureaucratic and boring and procedural, but they're all building blocks of a system of imperial impunity that's existential for, hundreds of millions of people around the world, right? We're seeing the effects of that impunity now in Gaza. The more that impunity extends, the deeper it penetrates into these institutions, the more difficult it will be to challenge. And so it's important to challenge these, early symptoms of what seems to be a total institutional breakdown at the international level, to be aware of them, to talk about them, to analyze them, and with as much power as we can muster, to oppose them, because these are stepping stones to much bigger changes on the horizon.
Thank you so much. And the second question, which was, how do you see DSA and the efforts and concerns discussed in this call, is a great way to end with some calls to action and some specific next steps that people in different parts of the country can join in on. So first one, of course, if you are in New York or if you are nearby New York, hope to see all of you at 9 a.m. on September 26th. In Times Square to join PYM's march. I shared a link to an Instagram graphic in the chat that has all the information, so you can save it, you can share it with your chapters. If you're in a nearby chapter, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Connecticut, anywhere nearby, consider organizing a contingent. We know our comrades in the anti-war working group of New York City DSA will be there and are mobilizing to join the march. So we can connect you. If you want to reach out and talk to me about how you can connect with some local New York comrades and bring a contingent from a nearby city or a nearby state and meet with them, please get in touch. This is my job. This is what you elected me for. Francesca@dsacommittees.org. So please, we want to help you, figure out how you can join this rally. If you are anywhere else in the country, you can support the Block Baerbock campaign. I shared the link earlier, but I will share it again. So you can share this petition. You can send out the text of this petition with the link to all of your members, all of your supporter list. You can encourage them to sign it. You can, print some materials, table, bring some information about this petition to your community events. And I believe we will continue to work with Progressive International to put together some material and continue to share it with chapters, do more of these educational panels like we did today, so that chapters are empowered to talk about this campaign, to talk about what it represents and what it means in the coming year while Baerbock's presidency continues. And then also want to highlight another campaign that PYM just launched. Excuse me, airplane. Which is AIPAC out of US politics. So just drop the link in the chat. This was very recently announced at the People's Conference for Palestine in Detroit, organized by PYM. So this is another petition. This is another call to action that you can share with your chapters and with your membership. And then finally, the other event that is happening in the coming week is the Global Smooth Flotilla is sailing to Gaza. And as I'm sure people have been following, this is the largest civil society-led effort to break the blockade, break the siege on Gaza, deliver aid. As far as I know, in history, there have been previous flotillas, but they were smaller. And this one includes about 50 ships, activists and participants from over 40 countries. And so we need to, keep all eyes on the flotilla in the coming week. The International Committee organized a live stream a couple of days ago with participants, and they shared that they expect to reach the critical zone where they might be intercepted by Israel around the 25th, 26th. Of course, it's all a bit unpredictable. They have suffered various delays, including, getting attacked by drones while docked at the port of Tunis. Okay, yes, I'm seeing in the chat that they may be delayed up until the 29th. But we're encouraging all chapters to get ready and to prepare solidarity mobilizations, to start mobilizing this week, start having rallies, start connecting with, if you're in a port city, start connecting with dock workers in your port. Let them know that this is happening. Let them know that dock workers in Genoa will be striking, the dock workers in ports all around the Mediterranean basin are responding to this call. And start planning with your chapter, like what are you going to do to uphold the call for solidarity from the flotilla when they reach, if they get intercepted, to demand safe passage for their members, to put pressure on the governments of the activists participating, to use their diplomatic power to guarantee safe passage, and fundamentally to respect the international law that says that Israel is an occupying power, does not have the power to impose a siege on Gaza, and these activists that are sailing with the flotilla have a right under international law to reach Gaza and to deliver aid. And so we put together this toolkit to help you think about how to prepare in the next few days. We still have about a week until the flotilla will reach. So this is a good time to talk to Palestinian organizations in your area, solidarity organizations, your local coalitions, your local partners, and think about a plan together. And figure out, if the flotilla gets intercepted, what are we going to do? Where are we going to rally? Make a plan now, communicate it with your membership, communicate it with partner organizations, so that we are all ready to sort of be the land crew of the flotilla. Not just the sort of sea crew, but the land crew that can support the effort from here, from where we are. And so with this, the final plug I have for you is, if you enjoy this panel, if you find it useful, if you learned something today, if you're interested in organizing events like this, consider joining the International Committee. I just dropped a link in the chat. We organize tons of events like this, and maintain and develop relationships with local and international partners that allow DSA to be connected to an internationalist struggle, beyond our own domestic concerns, but truly to be part of a socialist struggle that is internationalist in nature, that is able to connect across borders, across countries, across issues. And so with that, I will thank again our panelists for making us on a Sunday. And good luck to everybody with your work and with your mobilizations.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Great
you
to
so
see you all.
much. See you in the streets.